welcome back to Barnstable this morning. Just about 20 minutes toward the top of the hour on this Tuesday morning. I'm Sarah Colvin, and joining me live on the phone, I welcome our Cape and Island State Senator Dan Wolf. Senator Wolf, good morning.
Good morning. Good snowy morning, Sarah. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And yourself?
Good. I'm just on the arrival end of about a 2.5-hour commute into Boston this morning. And if people on the Cape think they've got a lot of snow, you should see what it looks like up here. Wow.
I can only imagine. I spent a couple of winters living up in the city, Dan, and it was just, not pleasant. It's very difficult to navigate the city when there's all that storm, that snow in the way. And I have to say, I think it's a very smart idea that they delayed the Patriots parade until tomorrow at least, because I was, how are they going to get the roads clear to have those duck-boats go through?
Well, even by tomorrow. I mean, they just set a record for the most snow in a week. In Boston, the combined storms are over 40 inches, so you're approaching 4 feet of snow in the last week here, and it's been cold, so not much of it has melted. So it's going to be interesting even tomorrow for that parade.
Absolutely. So, Dan, talk to me a little bit about how you and your fellow legislators kind of work with the state and with your districts during a storm event such as this. Obviously, a blizzard of historic proportions that we have experienced over the past week.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, realistically, what we deal with during the storm and shortly after is public safety. So the most important thing during a storm like the one that we've had is to make sure that if people lose power or if there are transportation issues, people are trapped, can't get access to food or medical care, that we are now real-time responding to that and working both with local officials and with state officials. That's really our function. It's sort of a microcosm of what the job is overall, Sarah, which is it's to play conduit between the constituents who we represent and the services that they need access to. And, of course, during a storm, sometimes that's very critical.
Absolutely. And did you find that many of your constituents were reaching out to you for assistance to help play in that conduit role?
The big issue was Nantucket during this storm. Provincetown was without power for a good part, but I think probably everybody listening heard that Nantucket, the entire island, lost power, which is about 12,000 customers. And beyond that, beyond the losing power, that meant they lost access to electricity. The mobile phones on the island were down. So, everybody had inconvenience, but there were some, you could say life-threatening situations there had it not been addressed. So, I think that was probably the biggest issue was Nantucket, other than the power outages, widespread again in Provincetown, but really all over the Cape and Islands. We did pretty well in this storm, actually.
I think we did as well. And, I saw some of those pictures from Nantucket and especially in and around the harbor area and the water coming up on the streets. Very scary, kind of definitely tough for all of those. And, of course, I'm thinking up on the South Shore, Situate and Marshfield got hit pretty hard. I think we got a lot of snow here on the Cape, but I think we were very lucky that we didn't have widespread power outages that were predicted.
Absolutely. And the coastal damage is going to happen at every one of these storms. So you've got coastal damage, and you've got flooding, and then, of course, you've got the wind and the deep snow. So it's a multiple effect, and it's a lot of stuff going on. So.
Absolutely. So, Dan, anything else on the storm, on the response that you would like to discuss before we move on to our next topic?
No, I think, there's more snow on the way. We're in a very stormy, cold pattern. So people should be clearing snow off to the degree that they can. So there's room for the next storm, because I was looking at some of the long-range maps early this morning, and it really looks to me like at least through the 20th of February, they're forecasting a lot of cold, and that's just something we're going to be dealing with.
Great. Okay, I want to move on, Dan, and talk a little bit about housing, and this goes back to December. I understand you attended a housing summit in Worcester back in December talking about rural housing. Now, of course, being a resident of Hyannis, it's hard for me to think about Cape Cod as a rural location, but really we are. So tell me a little bit about what some of the issues are that are being discussed in terms of housing for a rural community, and how Cape Cod is a little different when we think about that community as a whole.
Well, we all have different challenges around the state. Just hang on one second, Sarah.
Oh, absolutely.
Sorry, I am navigating now with some traffic and parking issues here in Boston, so I apologize for that. Clearly, there's a disconnect on the Cape, and again, every area of the state has its own challenges. But the disconnect on the state is the average income is low, and the real estate and property values are high, and that includes housing at all levels. So the question is, how do people in our district live? School teachers, police officers, firefighters, service sector people, all of whom you would call lower and middle class earners. How do they afford to live and have housing in our district? We have to figure out how to close that gap. And for those who don't want to see higher real estate taxes, which we really can't afford, we need to see a source of revenue in the future to subsidize housing. And I think that's the issue. How do we build affordable housing? And then how do we subsidize either people in purchasing or in affording to rent those housing? And especially for young families, we know that's a real crisis as well.
Absolutely, Dan. And, I think there's a gap, too, obviously, with we mentioned the service workers, the police, the school workers, the teachers, et cetera, and maybe those who make too much money to qualify for the affordable housing or for the subsidized housing, but don't make enough to be able to buy a market rate home here on Cape Cod.
Especially a problem on the Cape because our values are so high. So if you look at the state as a broad brush and you figure those percentage of poverty level or average income that would qualify, it doesn't even get close, as you said, to the Cape. So we have to be creative because what might work out in Western Mass or in other areas of Cape Cod, other areas of the state are not going to work in Cape Cod relative to housing. We have filed legislation to create a rural policy commission in Massachusetts. It sounds like more bureaucracy, but it really is needed because the urban issues and the rural issues are so different. So we filed with Representative Kulik from the western part of the state a commission which will look specifically at rural areas, Western Mass, and the Cape and Islands, to make sure we're figuring out ways to bridge that gap for families and individuals who, again, we need in our community. They're a vital part of our community. They help define our community. We have to make sure that living here is possible and affordable for them.
Absolutely. So what are the next steps on that legislation, Dan?
Well, it'll work its way through. We're going to be talking to other legislators and looking for garnering support for that legislation. It'll take 6 to 12 months for it to work its way through committee and then get to the floor for approval. And during that time, we'll be working with the Cape and Islands delegation. And again, we're 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, so it's good bipartisan cooperation to get this done. Because, then we'll be able to speak with one voice and really garner the resources, I think, better define what the challenges are for the rural communities and address it. We have great players on the Cape, the Housing Assistance Corporation, Community Development Partnership out on the Outer Cape is a great organization dealing with housing. And then, of course, we've got all of the housing authorities in the various towns. So we have a lot of smart, committed, dedicated people. And I think what this commission will do is it'll connect state and federal resources to local communities and those working on these issues and help bridge that gap. I'd ask all the listeners to put their creative hat on and think about how do we as a community come together and make sure that there's affordable housing for those that we depend on and to have the diversity in our neighborhoods and in our towns that we want on the Cape. It's a real challenge, but I do think it's something that we can get our arms around.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, I thank you for your attention to that matter. We know how important it is to those of us who live and work here on Cape Cod. And I thank you, as always, for joining us here on the show. And stay safe up there in Boston. Be careful on those streets. And we will talk with you again in a couple of weweeks.
Sorry if I seem distracted. This was probably the most challenging multitasking I've ever done, trying to find parking in Boston with 10-foot snowbanks while talking to you. So
well, I give you a lot of credit because it sounds like you're just at home sitting in a chair. So good luck to you. I know finding parking in Boston on a good day, isn't fun. So I give you a lot of credit for that.
Thank you, Sarah. Have a great day and
Thanks.
Stay safe.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
And this is why I take the train when I go into the city. I thank so much Dan Wolf, our Cape and Islands State Senator, for joining us.